when she's trying to use her banking app. Not being able to see means that she uses her screen reader. So she's came across trying to make a payment, but when she goes to press the button to make a payment, she literally cannot do that because the developers doing the coding behind that button haven't coded it.
Do you think we therefore actually severely underestimate how hard it can be for people to process information and make decisions when some of these barriers are in the way? You can also subscribe to extended cuts of these conversations, where my guests go deeper into how they actually think, make decisions, and handle the messy bits. But for now, enjoy the conversation. This is Marketing Careers Uncovered, and I'm Dave Hayward. Most organizations would say that they want to be easier to understand, easier to buy from, easier to stick with. And that sounds really obvious and self-evident. But what we see in practice is that an awful lot of that gets lost. Is what we're putting out into the world actually workable and usable for the people we want to reach? And I'm really thrilled to have Sharon Flaherty with me today. She spent years working across that really exciting intersection of content, customer experience, inclusive communications, accessibility, both in-house and now running her own agencies. Sharon, just to kick us off a little bit, it'd be great just to hear a little bit more about you, what you're up to right now, and the kind of work you're getting involved in.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hello. As you said, my name is Sharon and I am the CEO of Folk, a strategic comms agency. We work across B2B, B2C, have a really big interest in health and financial services. But at the heart of what we do is putting people and the real perspectives of real people, in which ironically becomes even more important now with AI. And I think people are starting to realize that a little bit more. I'm very passionate about fairness and how that shows up in society and at brands. And there's lots of different ways that can show up or not show up. We set up about 3 years ago something called the Real Folk Panel. And that is a panel of comms professionals but advocating for our community, because no matter at any point across any organization, we don't have the diversity that we would like. And, it's really important then to make sure you're getting these perspectives that you don't have yourself. And so I think it's important to realize that you don't, we don't all have the lived experience of everything. How can we, So that's why you need to make sure you're getting different thoughts into the work that you're doing, because otherwise we tend to create work on assumptions rather than actual truth in people's experience. So that's something that I'm really, really passionate about.
So let's start on that thread then of ease of use. I think we talk a really good game about ease of use. I've run various customer client feedback initiatives over the year, and it's one of the most common value drivers that come through from the market. Be easier to use, be easier to access on all fronts. But I'd be really interested in your view, from your work and experience, where have you seen and experienced friction most commonly showing up in the customer journey, and why is it? Why do we seem so blind to it?
I mean, gosh, it's a good question. So where do we experience it showing up? It shows up in so many places, and I think one of the things is it can often be hidden, because your needs when you're buying from a brand would be different from mine. So I got an example here. So I mentioned the Real Folk panel a moment ago, and one of the members of that panel, so she became blind. So she wasn't born blind, but she lost her sight as a teenager. And so that's actually really interesting in her perspective, because she knows what it's like to have seen and now not be able to. But she experiences quite a lot. And one of the things she's come across a few times is when she's trying to use her banking app. So obviously not being able to see means that she uses her screen reader. So she's came across trying to make a payment, but because people developing websites and apps, if they're not developing it from a place where they're thinking about screen readers, then things get missed. So when she goes to press the button to make a payment, she literally cannot do that because the developers doing the coding behind that button haven't coded it. So I think that's probably a really good example and illustrates the point that it could be anywhere, but you'll only see it or bump into it when it's something that impacts you.
Do you think we therefore actually severely underestimate how hard it can be for people to process information and make decisions when some of these little barriers are in the way?
I think we massively underestimate it, and I think that's the problem. I think we somehow have this view that there's like the masses are all this, like we're all the same, and this, this, most things work for everyone. And there's these fringe cases, but it's just not true. We've done our own research, and the thing, like, it shows that like over 58% of people in the UK are what brands would see as their minorities, right? So whether that's from an underrepresented group, or we have a protected characteristic, people just don't realize that you're actually not designing for an average user. It doesn't work like that. Like, we need to, because nobody is an average user. Do you know what I mean? There is, you could have
Yeah,
ADHD.
it's a bit of a fallacy, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
We're
it's just,
not
it's lazy. It's
homogenous.
lazy. I think it's lazy. Like, how many people are being diagnosed with ADHD, right? So if you add up all these different things, like you can easily see how it's no longer the minorities. So people with ADHD, let's say you getting a letter in the post. Well, it's well known that people with ADHD don't open their letters that often. Like, piles up, like, so that, that you can see there, that's like, there's friction there in that comms, in that process, that could cause a problem if someone doesn't open a letter and misses something. So it's actually understanding actually the nuances of customers.
If you wind the clock back for yourself, did you underestimate the impact of all this early on? What
Yep.
changed for you to build this quite strong viewpoint?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's my personal story. So I, in all honesty, probably didn't think about it at all very much. If I go back to 29, we had experienced some challenges with pregnancy. So, no, nothing that other people wouldn't have experienced. For example, early miscarriage is really common in the UK. But there was a pregnancy where we were at hospital, and the consultant said, "Oh, you know, we think that there's a risk that the baby has Down syndrome." And what that led me to was leave the hospital and go, "Oh, you get your tests, and they, figure out if there may be a disability or not." And it was that was the first time where I actually started to think about, I guess, things outside of my own bubble. So I did loads of research, and I thought, oh, well, I actually have never spent any time with anyone with Down syndrome. So what does that mean? What does that look like? And that experience led me to see things in a different way.
Yes, it's almost like you've been given a different set of glasses, put them on, and gone, "Whoa, hold on, everything.
Exactly
This all
that.
just looks completely wrong."
Exactly that. And I think that's probably part of the challenge, because unless you have, I think, a moment or experience something, it doesn't have to be as big as that, but somewhere at work, it's kind of hard for you to understand it. So it's trying to figure out how to get people to see that. And, sometimes that's in hard numbers, sometimes it's in other ways, but that is the challenge.
Yeah, perhaps the concept of linear customer journeys are a bit at fault here. We really don't clue into the surrounding context for 20 different things that are going on in someone's life that could absolutely derail that. It's lack of empathy, isn't it,
Yeah.
really?
And understanding, I think. And I don't know what just is, where's this gap come from? But I think what we still do is I don't think the fix is that hard. I think what we still do is we bolt on maybe this thinking at the end, and maybe we'll do some testing. Like, it depends on what we're talking about, but let's say it's customer journey, because it's probably the simplest. Like, you do some testing at the end with customers. Well, I don't know how, it's thinking about that design of that. How do you decide who's testing? How frequently do you do it? But also, you don't do it at the end. You do it at the start. You co-design at the start. That's where you avoid these issues. It's not changing anything. You're just moving it to earlier in the journey rather than at the end, when it's going to be, well, okay, well, that's when things don't happen or get deprioritized, or
Yeah.
that will go into that sprint, for example, for that to happen another time. So,
Yeah, yeah. And do you see a common set of assumptions that well-intentioned teams and businesses make that divert us away from thinking about this stuff too early?
it's a good question. I mean, I think possibly it does really depend on the sector. And I suppose that's where it gets interesting. But if we were looking at sectors that are regulated, we have compliance, we have consumer duty, we have the FCA. And so that might be where we end up assuming that actually it's we need to just focus on vulnerable customers, and vulnerable customers are often people who have low financial capability, people who have less chance of understanding terms and conditions, for example. So there are all those other things I haven't just said, and there'll be loads that I don't know about. We don't know it until we speak to people and different people, and it gets surfaced.
So
So
you've got to really go and seek out and understand your customers and the assumptions you might make about who your customers are and
yeah,
how they interact and what they feel.
and that's
That's
just
what I'm hearing.
this doesn't have to be hard. This is consulting more with people with lived experience. This is listening to the calls that you record in your call center if you have a call center. Like the data and information is there. It's just what you choose to do with it, you know? So again, removing this from it just being these edge cases or fringe cases, like we've said, it's not. It's just, this is about improving your customer experience. Improving, because actually, if this is not enough for people to think it's worthwhile, maybe what's coming down the line will help. Because with AI, it's really changing things on its head. Customer experience is going to change massively, and how brands show up for the customers is going to be really important, because some of that choice is going to be taken away from them. Is, yeah, making sure that you giving a really good customer experience will be more important now than it, and in the next few years than it ever has. So that's a really good commercial reason to make sure that you are understanding your customers and the nuances of them.
What's the commercial gain you see for brands and businesses that you work with that get this right?
I mean, if you're asking, can you track an ROI? I think that's that. I think that would be wrong, because but the clients that we work with who really care about this, there's two parts to this. Let me go back. I suppose the first part is you may have less customer complaints, right? That's kind of an obvious one. If you're depending on the sector, if you're regulated, then you definitely don't want to be getting in trouble, with the regulator and the FCA. I guess the issue is measurement, isn't it? 'Cause we're often not great at measuring anyway. Like something like this is quite hard to measure. A lot of it's about reputation, as well as making sure that you're not
Yeah.
having these issues with customers and complaints and reputation.
My biggest question wraps around all this, because we're really talking about organizational change, a change of mindset, change of approach, change of ways of working. In your view, what do people really underestimate about what that really takes? Yeah.
I mean, that can be quite hard. In my experience, this would go for whether it's, it's around accessibility, vulnerable customers, even innovation. Like, it does come a little bit down to culture. It comes down to culture, it comes down to leadership, and, the openness, the willingness for change and to be hearing different points of view, to do things differently. And we see that actually so differently in the organizations we work with. So some organizations will be so open to wanting to make sure they're really accessible, doing the right things by all of their customers. But they're often what we find already there. So Nationwide Building Society is a really good example of that. I'm always quite impressed with them because they are proactive. It seems to be in their DNA. They really want to do the right thing by their customers, and whatever that looks like. Um, Whereas others, it's a bit more pushing water upstream, and that's where it becomes difficult, because if they don't already understand, of course you can educate, but it may just never be a priority for them, and it comes down to leadership priorities, because there's always lots of stuff going on in a business. Of course, depending on the size of the business, this can get very complex. You could have thousands and thousands of employees, or you could have 50 to 100. So depending on where you work and your level, that really changes how much of an impact you can have, the priorities of the business. So, but often we do see that people are in a camp. They're either really open, or it's going to be really, really hard work. And generally when it's like that, I'll be honest, it it's hard to go over the lines. But yeah.
But yeah, and it can be such a gargantuan thing that you look at, a sort of unsolvable puzzle amongst everything. I think reflecting on everything that we've just talked about, the single most pragmatic thing anyone can do to start to shift that mindset is to run some really deep customer research, really get under the skin of a diverse set of your actual customers who are using your product, using your service, and finding out where are you falling short, where are things a little bit harder than they should be, regardless
Yes.
of who you are within an organization. I mean, if you start down that, you naturally open the door.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think sometimes what we see is people default to customer surveys, right? So a bit more quantitative when they're trying to understand the customer's experience, but the qualitative stuff's really important. So, while you may be looking at slightly smaller numbers, is actually understanding the behavior So survey doesn't tell you that. You need to understand how customers are interacting with the brand, where they're getting stuck, where they're not. Where's the moments of delight? Because it isn't all negative, right? There's some great stuff here, and that again, which I talked about a little bit with AI, becomes like so important because um, think the future or even right now is like how are people even using Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini for their research? Well, we know that people use it a lot for health. That's got risk, but that's got opportunity. We know that they use it for travel. Again, lots of opportunities for brands. And then, financial services. So brands need to think about that. And so if there's ever been an argument to understand customers and the nuance of them and their behavior, it is more important now than ever because the landscape is so fragmented. Take time to understand your customers, and that's gonna be much more beneficial with the landscape we're in.
Yeah, because it comes back to that eternal, ubiquitous marketing principle of have a deep understanding of your customers and your market. Bake this in by design. It becomes easier to deliver, and then it becomes far easier to win.
Yeah, bake it in exactly at the start. Just it's speaking to customers, but just not defaulting to what your assumptions are of the average customer, because there is no average customer. And I think once, as soon as we get that out of our heads, I think that's when things open up and become more interesting. There's no average.
Marvelous. Well, thanks so much for joining us. And thanks to you as well for listening. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe for future episodes, leave a review, or share it with your friends and colleagues. And we'll see you next time. You can also subscribe to extended cuts of these conversations, where my guests go deeper into how they actually think, make decisions, and handle the messy bits. But for now, enjoy the conversation.